We need to have many difficult conversations in the West, and I don't think we're going to have the conversation in Britain that America is trying to have over there. This whole incident has just been harrowing, frankly. My timeline is nothing but this at the moment. And so I guess I've got to talk about it. So, there is a real problem with race relations in America now. I'm surely not the first to bring this up. You can be like, duh, we know. But the problem actually isn't on the ledger of the average white person. The problem is on the ledger of the average black person. And a general level of... I don't even know what I can say on YouTube. I don't believe I can adequately characterize what I'm trying to say on YouTube. And so I guess I won't. I will say there's a general level of resentment and hatred that comes from one community to another that is unsustainable. I mean, this is just monstrous, frankly, in many cases. And there will have to be a time where there is an accounting for it. Now, I know that many people in one community will say, well, look what happened historically. So, yeah. Do you want to incur the moral burden that you feel that those people owe towards you? Because that's what's happening at the moment. The black community is incurring a moral burden very similar to the moral burden that they believe the white community is carrying. And one day, in the not-so-distant future, people aren't going to be sympathetic to your moral claims. So, going to the DeCarlos Brown Jr. case, he apparently was mental. I mean, genuinely, he was insane, clearly. And so that makes his presence on the streets all the more dangerous. But I think, I was very cautious in this to say, well, look, we don't know that he wasn't just mental. He seems to have been mental. We don't know that this wasn't racially charged. But I have had a lot of people point out to me, well, it's very difficult to experience an interaction like this between a black person and a white person without it being racially charged. The history is always present in the black community. They carry it willingly. In fact, they seem to enforce it on one another, frankly. And if it's not from them, it's definitely coming from the media and the system itself. Especially in Democrat-run areas. So it's very difficult to separate, if it is even possible, to separate these kinds of actions from questions of race, resentment, and history. And so he can say things that sound crazy, that the government implanted materials in his body that made him do this. The material, put it like that. The material using my body, that's it. You know, that's not me. I'm talking about just for no reason. But since they did that, now they've got to investigate the material my body exposed to. So, no taking responsibility for this. Even though after he stabbed her, he said, I got that white girl, which would imply that there was some sort of racial animus there. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that. I mean, that could just be a way of characterizing her. But, as it was pointed out to me, which I think is a fair argument, when you put it in the context of the United States' history and the current political milieu, how could you separate these things? That's a good question. I'm not sure you can. Anyway, the media is, of course, a part of the system that is equally as evil as everything else involved in this story. The shocking and apparently random fatal stabbing. So, right, just a random fatal stabbing. And then you've got the pressure people had to put on the media itself, right? The New York Times, again, Elon had to shame these guys publicly before his 200 and however many million followers on Twitter to get them to finally cover it. And then when they did cover it, well, it's about the firestorm on the right. It's not about the fact that this happened. I love this byline. Security footage capturing the unprovoked stabbing in Charlotte became an accelerant for conservative arguments about the perceived failings of democratic policies. Perceived failings. Perceived. As if, I mean, yeah, they are definitely being perceived, but that's because of the actual failings. 14 times this guy was let go. Again, by black judges, by people who can't be separated from the political history of the United States. And so this is just all just unforgivable, really, but obviously it is. And so there's no point me labouring that point. And the thing is, DeCarlos Brown, I think he was crazy. I think Oliver here is wrong. I think he was crazy, but he's not outside of the system, and the system is set up to give him, as she says, he rehearsed his magical get out of trouble words as he was exiting the train. Yeah. These words are him appealing to the political and racial history of the United States. This doesn't have any weight outside of the American context. Like, just to be clear, and I think a lot of Americans fail to understand this, there isn't white guilt in Europe. We don't have this burden of white guilt. The interaction between like Europeans and Africans, I'm not saying it's great, but it's not the same as Americans and blacks. We don't carry this burden of white guilt. We just don't feel guilty for colonization because it just wasn't like American slavery, I guess. And our slavery is so remote from here that we just don't carry it. And so the closest we get in Britain is the Windrush generation. But I really don't think anyone feels bad about they don't feel guilty about them at all. I mean, they were allowed against our will to come here for a start. So it's just not the same. We just aren't carrying the same burden that the Americans are carrying. And this, she called me the N-word, is him playing on it. This him pulling on it. This him appealing. Can I get out of this by appealing to the political history of the United States and the current political structures which have brought the pathologization of white people in the black community to this point? And this was really, really widespread. And it's one of those things where you just can't help but feel a bit... Again, I can't really express myself properly on YouTube, and I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be racist. I'm just trying to give what I think is an accurate assessment of the problem. And honestly, a lot of the time, I've been to America many times, right? So I've seen many areas where there don't appear to be problems. But there are also many areas where there are problems. And one of those problems is the people in the system itself. I mean, they genuinely are funding it so that people who, even leftists that you speak to, like I spoke to Evan, he was like, yeah, this guy probably needs to be in an asylum. It's like, yeah, no kidding. So why was he on the streets? And up until this very point, Evan would doubtless have been like, yeah, no, it's good that the left-wing NGO MacArthur Foundation gave $3.3 million to reduce the jail population, which ensures that DeCarlos Brown gets out on the streets so he can murder a white girl when he sees one, right? So it's not anything outside of what is designed to happen. Like, the point is to put these people back on the streets. But then you get the response, and the response is one of those things where it's just like, no, guys, you have to take this on the chin, and if you don't, then the nature of race relations in America is probably going to change through not just this incident, there are many others, but there will be many others in the near future because of an internal disposition and belief in the black community that somehow this is all justified. And therefore, when something like this happens, you get Van Jones coming out and defending him. Well, the man was hurting. You don't know that. You don't know that. You don't know. I mean, he seems to be mad. I don't know if that means he's hurting, but that also means he shouldn't be on the streets, right? But also, why are we speaking in his defense? Whoopi Goldberg, don't stop politicizing this. This is not political. No, it is 100% political. This happened as a result of policy. It was policy that put this man in this position to murder this girl, a Ukrainian refugee. Like, there's just no arguing that she is somehow connected to black oppression in America. There's just no arguing it. There's no linkage there whatsoever, but he didn't know that and he didn't care. She was white and he thought, oh, okay. And of course, none of the black people on the carriage did anything to help. It's far too late before any of them thought, oh, maybe we should do anything for her. And say, oh, it's not political. Well, I mean, I think it might be, actually. I can't help but see it as being political. And I can't help but see that your defense, your attempt to obfuscate, to dive in the way, that's also political. And that's also because there's an accounting, there is a moral ledger on either side of every question. And Whoopi's side is racking up demerits in a way that probably won't be cleaned off very well. And then you have the Black Lives Matter Twitter account, which has posted a video of a woman arguing, quote, "We have a right to violence." It's like, okay, well, if you believe that, and if that is representative of a large swathe of that community, which we're told Black Lives Matter is, then that kind of implies that other people actually are not insensible for what is termed white flight. That's what that implies. If you have a right to just murder white people when they're unawares and sitting on a train, then all sorts of things follow from that. All sorts of things. And nurturing this hatred and grievance against white people, okay, continue down this path and see what happens. You aren't going to get the results you want, because everything about Black Lives Matter was predicated on the idea, for all their tough talk, it was predicated on the idea that they could endear themselves to the moral sympathies of white people. And the white people give them loads of money and give them everything they wanted. When those moral sympathies dry up, then you'd be surprised at how things change. And this kind of attitude from the black community, I saw lots of this. Either total indifference to the woman's death, or that she somehow deserved it because she was white, and somehow that made her an oppressor of blacks. Now that deranged, absolutely deranged. She's Ukrainian. The Ukrainians have been a heavily oppressed people throughout their history, and you wouldn't want to have gone through a bunch of the stuff the Ukrainians went through, like at all, in the 20th century, far more recently than what the black community has been through. Genuinely awful, and it's indicative of a widespread sickness in that community. And while this is allowed to fester, while this is considered to be somehow acceptable, the case for a separation will be made, and it will seem more persuasive the more this happens. And like I said, I'm not saying I'm in favor of any of this, obviously, but I think this is the direction in which things are heading, and I think it is the black community itself that is driving it there.